The CEO had always been a man of purpose, driven by a relentless ambition to build his business empire from the ground up. The early days had been filled with sleepless nights, countless meetings, and the constant chase for success. He never imagined that all of it would come at the cost of the one thing that had once meant more to him than anything: his marriage. When he first met her, his wife, he had been younger, eager to prove himself. She was the calm to his storm, the person who understood him in ways no one else could. They had a love that seemed unbreakable. Their connection was immediate, and over the years they built a life together. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They had dreams of growing old together, of building a family. The idea of leaving her never crossed his mind. Yet somewhere along the way, the dreams he had for his business began to overshadow the life they were building. In the early days of their marriage, it had been easy to balance. There were moments when he would come home after a long day at work, and she would be there waiting, ready to listen to him vent about the challenges of the day. They would talk about their future, about the things they wanted to do, the places they wanted to visit, the family they hoped to start. He loved those moments. He loved the idea of having a family with her, but as the years passed, the business grew. What started as a small startup began to gain attention, and with that attention came demands. He found himself traveling more, attending more meetings, dealing with more pressure. The once balanced life they had built together became strained under the weight of his ambition. He couldn't remember the last time they had just spent an evening together, talking about nothing. The last time they had laughed over dinner without him checking his phone every few minutes, worried about missing an important email. She had tried to understand. She really had. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the distance between them only grew. She had stopped complaining. Instead, she waited for him to come home, only for him to retreat into his office to catch up on work. She had stopped asking for his time, knowing it was something he could never give. She had tried to fill the empty spaces with friends, with activities, with hobbies, but nothing seemed to fill the growing hole in her heart. One evening, she sat across from him at the kitchen table, a quiet sadness in her eyes. She had asked as gently as she could, "Do you still want this? Do you still want us?" Her voice was soft, but the weight of the question hung heavy in the air. He had looked at her, his mind a swirl of thoughts, but none of them made sense. He had always wanted this, didn't he? But the truth was, he didn't know anymore. The business had consumed him, leaving no room for anything else. He had convinced himself that this was what he needed to do, that the sacrifices he was making now would pay off in the long run. He had promised himself he would find a balance eventually. But there was always another meeting, another deadline, another task. And all the while, she had become more and more of a stranger to him, as he had become to her. He could see the pain in her eyes, but he didn't know how to fix it. His words felt hollow even to him. He had promised her everything when they first got together, but now it felt like he was failing her in every way. The reality of what he had become, this man obsessed with his work, a man who no longer knew how to connect with the woman he once loved, hit him all at once. "I don't know," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's happened to us." She had nodded slowly, her face unreadable. And then, after a long silence, she spoke the words that neither of them were ready to hear. "Maybe we need to take a break. Maybe you need to figure out what you want." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a demand. It was a simple truth, one that cut deeper than any harsh words could have. She wasn't asking him to choose between her and the business. She was asking him to choose once and for all whether he could balance both. But deep down, she knew that it wasn't just about balance. It was about something more fundamental, something that had been lost in the shuffle of endless meetings and late nights. "I don't want to lose you," he had said, his voice cracking. But even as the words left his mouth, he realized how empty they sounded. He hadn't lost her yet, but he was getting dangerously close. The next few days passed in a blur. There were no big arguments, no dramatic confrontations, just an overwhelming sense of inevitability that hung in the air. She started packing her things quietly, one bag at a time. She didn't raise her voice, didn't cry, didn't beg him to make a decision. She just did what she needed to do. She had already made up her mind, even if he hadn't. The moment came when he came home late one evening, expecting her to be there. But the house was quiet. The lights in the kitchen were dim. Her things were gone, replaced by an emptiness that seemed to stretch through the entire house. On the counter there was a note, simple and to the point: "I'm leaving. I need to find myself again. I hope you can do the same." He stood there for a long time, staring at the note, the reality of it all sinking in. He had lost her, and in doing so he had lost a part of himself. There was no one to blame but himself. His work, his ambition, everything had taken priority over her, over them. And now, she was gone. The next few years passed in a haze of business meetings, international travel, and a constant rush of success. But beneath the surface there was a loneliness that never quite went away. He had told himself that he was fine, that he didn't need anyone, but the truth was different. He had built his empire, but at the cost of the one person who had truly known him, and the emptiness that followed was something he could never fill. In the years that followed, the CEO's life continued in a whirlwind of activity. He threw himself into his work almost to the point of obsession. The business he had started from scratch had now expanded into a global empire. Every year his wealth grew exponentially, and with it his responsibilities. But no matter how much he accomplished, there was something missing. The feeling of emptiness that had gnawed at him after the breakup lingered, impossible to ignore. The first few months without her were the hardest. There were moments of profound loneliness, times when he would catch himself waiting for her to walk through the door, just like she used to. He remembered the sound of her laugh, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about their dreams, and the way she could make him feel like the world was right, even during the most stressful days. Now those memories only brought pain, but gradually the pain became something else. He buried himself in the work, finding comfort in the numbers, the deals, the projects that never seemed to end. The rush of success was enough to push the thoughts of her away, at least for a while. He told himself that he was fine, that he didn't need anyone else. His company had become his family, and for a long time that was enough. But deep down something was missing. It was the little things that got to him. The empty seat across from him at dinner meetings, the silence at home, the absence of someone to share the victories and the defeats. He had surrounded himself with colleagues and business partners, but none of them could replace what he had lost. No one understood him in the same way she had. No one knew the person he had been before the ambition took over. As the years passed, the ache faded into a dull background hum, something he could tune out when necessary. But the cracks in his heart never quite healed. He tried to date, but the relationships never seemed to go anywhere. It was as though he was looking for something he could never find. No one ever measured up to her, and no one could fill the void she had left behind. Deep inside, he wondered if he had ruined his chance at true happiness. The CEO's friends had noticed the change in him. They had all seen him as the man who could do no wrong, the one with the unshakable confidence and the drive to conquer anything. But now they saw the toll it had taken on him. He had become more guarded, more distant, even when he was surrounded by people. He still showed up to events, still smiled and charmed everyone in the room, but it was clear that something was missing. Every once in a while, one of his colleagues or a well-meaning friend would ask how he was doing, and he would always respond with a smile and a quick answer. "I'm fine, just busy." But those who knew him best could see through the facade. The truth was, he wasn't fine. Not really. Despite all of his success, he felt like he was just going through the motions of life, unable to truly live it. The business had consumed him in ways he never imagined, and now, when he had everything he had ever wanted, he found himself questioning whether it was worth it. He had gained everything he had worked for, but at what cost? He would often find himself staring at his phone, scrolling through old pictures of the two of them. There they were, smiling on their wedding day, their arms wrapped around each other as they looked forward to the future. He couldn't help but wonder how different things could have been if he had been there for her when she needed him. If he hadn't let the demands of the business take priority over the person who had stood by him through it all. Occasionally, he would run into old friends from their social circle. They would ask about her, about the family they had once talked about building together. And every time the question felt like a punch to the gut. What was he supposed to say? That he hadn't seen her in years? That they had gone their separate ways, each moving on in different directions? He had been so sure at the time that leaving her was the right decision. He had convinced himself that he was making a sacrifice for the greater good, for the future they had dreamed about. But the longer he spent alone, the more he realized how wrong he had been. She had been the one person who truly understood him, who supported him through the struggles, the late nights, and the setbacks. And now she was gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. The business continued to thrive, but his personal life was in shambles. He couldn't escape the feeling that he had lost something irreplaceable. No matter how many awards, accolades, or promotions he received, they didn't mean as much as they once did. He would come home to an empty house, walk through the halls that used to be filled with laughter and conversation, and feel the weight of the years pressing down on him. At night, he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she was doing. Was she happy? Was she moving on with her life? Did she ever think about him the way he thought about her? He knew that she had probably moved on. She had to have, right? She was strong. She had always been strong. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that somehow they were both stuck in the past, each of them living with the consequences of choices they couldn't take back. He had tried to contact her a few times, just to check in, but the calls went unanswered. The texts went unread. He knew she had moved on, but the silence hurt more than he expected. She had made it clear that she was done with him, and he couldn't blame her for it. She had every right to walk away, to find happiness elsewhere. But it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. In the quiet moments, when the rush of work and the noise of the world faded away, he was left alone with his thoughts, and the regret was always there, waiting for him. He had everything he had ever wanted, except for the one thing that had truly mattered. And now he was left with a life that, despite all its success, felt incomplete. But even as the years dragged on, he couldn't quite let go of the past. He still found himself thinking about her, wondering what could have been. And that question, what if, haunted him more than anything else. What if he had made different choices? What if he had been there for her when she needed him? What if he had never walked away? These questions would linger in his mind late into the night, as he drifted between sleep and wakefulness, unable to escape the memories of the life he had left behind. And as much as he tried to convince himself that he was fine, that everything was as it should be, deep down, he knew that he wasn't. The rest of the world may have seen him as a success, but he knew the truth. He had lost the most important thing he ever had, and no amount of money or business deals could ever fill the void. It had been years since he last saw her. Years filled with work, travel, and the endless pursuit of success. He had built an empire, yes, but in the process he had built a wall around his heart. He thought he had moved on, told himself that he was better off without her. But there were moments, brief flashes of memory when the past would break through and he would see her face in the crowd, hear her laugh in the distance. Those moments were fleeting, but they were enough to remind him of what he had lost. The day he saw her again was unlike any other. It started like any normal afternoon, with a trip to the mall to pick up a few things. He wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't a business meeting or a planned event, just a brief escape from the constant pressure of his work. But as he walked through the mall, the hustle and bustle of the busy Saturday crowd swirling around him, something caught his eye. There she was. He saw her standing near a coffee shop, her back turned to him, talking to a store attendant. For a moment he froze, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. But then she turned around and it was unmistakable. It was her, his ex-wife, the woman he had loved and lost. He felt a rush of emotions flood through him, surprise, confusion, regret. And then he noticed something else. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her were two young children, both of them looking up at her with wide eyes, holding her hands as they walked beside her. They looked so much like him. The resemblance was undeniable, striking even. Their eyes, their smiles, there was no question about it. These were his children, the ones he had never met, the ones he had never even known existed. The sight of them, so familiar yet so foreign, was like a punch to his gut. His heart raced as he watched them, the realization settling in like a weight he couldn't shake. He had missed all of this, their lives, their growth, everything. He had never been there for them, never seen them take their first steps or say their first words. He had no part in their childhood, and now he felt like a stranger to them. He stood there for a long time, watching them from a distance, too afraid to approach. His thoughts were a whirlwind, questions swirling in his mind faster than he could answer them. What had happened? How had they turned out like this without him? What had she told them about him? Did they even know who he was? The minutes felt like hours as he watched them, his heart heavy with regret. And then, without warning, the woman he had once called his wife began to walk away, the twins in tow. They disappeared into the crowd, and for a moment he stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. He had to do something. Without thinking, he began to walk in their direction, his mind racing as he tried to come up with the right words. But the closer he got, the more nervous he became. What was he supposed to say to her, to them? He had left all those years ago, and now here she was, living a life without him with 2 children he hadn't even known about. He didn't know how to feel. He didn't know how to face her. He caught sight of her again just ahead as she stopped to adjust the bags in her arms. He hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. But then, before he could stop himself, he called out her name. "Hey!" She turned, her eyes widening when she saw him. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence between them. It felt like the world had stopped, the noise of the mall fading into the background as they simply stared at each other. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but guarded. He didn't know what to say. All those years of silence, of regret, seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. There was so much he wanted to ask, so much he needed to say, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was look at her and then at the children standing beside her. They're mine, aren't they?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't know why he asked it. The answer was obvious. The children were his, just as much as they were hers. She nodded, her eyes shifting from him to the twins who were now looking up at him curiously. "Yes," she said. "They're yours." His heart felt like it had stopped beating. There was a lump in his throat, and for a moment he felt like he couldn't breathe. He had missed so much. The thought of them growing up without him was almost too much to bear. "I didn't know," he said, the words escaping him before he could stop them. "I didn't know about them." "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "You weren't there." The words stung, but she said them without bitterness, without anger. It was simply the truth. He hadn't been there, and now here he was, standing in front of them, a stranger to his own children. The twins were still staring at him, unsure of what to make of this strange man who had suddenly appeared in their lives. One of them, a little girl with curly hair and bright eyes, stepped forward hesitantly. She looked up at him, her innocent curiosity evident. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice soft and unsure. The question hit him like a wave, washing over him with the force of everything he had lost. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't know how to explain to them who he was or why he had been absent from their lives for so long. He felt like a ghost, someone who had come too late to make a difference. He crouched down to their level, trying to find the right words. I'm your dad," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry I wasn't there before." The little girl's eyes widened and she looked up at her mother for reassurance. She seemed unsure of what to make of him, this man who claimed to be her father but who felt so distant, so foreign. Her mother, however, just nodded, her expression unreadable. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said gently. "This is your dad. He's just been away for a long time." He felt like he was drowning in the weight of those words. He had missed everything. He had missed their births, their first steps, their first words. He had missed watching them grow up, and now he was here, a stranger trying to make up for lost time. "I'm sorry," he said again, the words coming out almost in a whisper. He didn't know what else to say. The silence between them felt heavy, like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. He wanted to reach out, to hug them, to make up for everything he had missed. But he didn't know how. He wasn't sure if he even had the right to. After all, he had walked away from them. He had chosen his work over his family, and now he was paying the price. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again. "Maybe we can talk later," she said, her tone soft but firm. "It's been a long time." "There's a lot to say." He nodded, unsure of what to say next. "I'd like that," he replied, his voice barely audible. And with that, she turned and began to walk away, the twins following close behind her. He stood there, frozen, watching them disappear into the crowd, feeling like a man who had lost everything, only to find it again, but too late. The weight of what had just happened settled in slowly. His heart felt heavy with a mixture of regret, relief, and confusion. He didn't know what to do next. He didn't know what came after this moment, after the realization that he had missed out on so much, but one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away again. It wasn't until a few days later that he finally heard from her again. He had spent the days since their brief encounter replaying the moment in his mind over and over. What had he expected? Had he really thought that seeing her would magically fix everything? He had walked away. And now, after all these years, he was trying to walk back in as though time could be reversed, as though everything could go back to how it was. But he knew better than that. The past was gone. The reality was now. His phone rang one morning, and when he saw her name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew it was a sign that she was ready to talk. She had reached out, and that in itself meant something. He picked up the phone with a deep breath. "Hello?" he said, his voice quiet, unsure. "Hi," she replied, her voice steady but gentle. "It's me." He let out a slow breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I've been thinking about what happened the other day," he said. "I didn't mean to overwhelm you, I didn't know what else to do." "I know," she replied softly. "It was unexpected. But we need to talk. There's a lot to explain, and I think it's time we do it." The words hung between them, filled with years of unspoken thoughts, regrets, and unasked questions. It was a moment of vulnerability that neither of them had expected. And yet it was exactly what they needed. "How about we meet tomorrow?" she asked. "We can talk. Maybe at a coffee shop somewhere neutral." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "That sounds good." And so the next day he found himself sitting at a small table in a quiet coffee shop waiting for her. His mind was racing with all the things he wanted to say. Should he apologize again? Should he ask how the twins were? Would they be there? There were so many questions, so many things he needed to know, and yet he felt like he didn't even know where to begin. When she walked in, his heart skipped again. She looked different, but then again, so did he. Time had passed, and it showed on both of them. She was still beautiful, but there was a calmness to her now, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. He noticed it right away, the way she held herself, as though she had learned to carry the weight of the world without letting it break her. She sat down across from him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The noise of the coffee shop filled the silence, but neither of them seemed to notice it. They were too focused on each other, too aware of the years that had passed and the conversation they had avoided for so long. Finally, she spoke. "I know this is hard for you," she said, her voice steady but soft. "And I'm not going to pretend that everything's okay. It's not. It hasn't been. But I think we both deserve to understand what happened, why it ended the way it did." He nodded, his heart heavy with guilt and regret. He had wanted this conversation for so long, and now that it was finally happening, he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted. "I never should have left. I should have tried harder. I should have been there for you. For the kids. I was so focused on the business and I lost sight of everything that really mattered." She sighed, her gaze soft but unwavering. "It's not just about you leaving," she said. "It's about the years of being ignored. The times I needed you and you weren't there. I understood that you were busy, that your work was important. But I wasn't asking for much. Just a little time, a little effort. You didn't give that to me, and I couldn't keep waiting for you to notice." He swallowed hard, her words hitting him with the weight of truth. He had been blind to her needs, to the way she had been carrying the weight of everything alone. He had thought that providing financially, being the successful CEO, was enough. But he now realized how wrong he had been. She hadn't needed his money. She hadn't needed the luxury. She had needed him. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't take back the past. I can't undo the hurt I caused. But I need you to know that I've thought about you, about the kids, every single day since I left, and not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted walking away." She nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "I believe you," she said quietly. "But belief isn't enough. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be okay. It's going to take time, time to rebuild trust, time to make up for the years you weren't there." He looked at her, feeling the sting of her words, but also a strange sense of hope. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't holding on to resentment. She was simply telling him the truth, and it was something he hadn't heard in a long time. "I understand," he said softly. "I'm not asking for everything right now. I want to be part of their lives. I want to get to know them. I want to be a father to them if you'll let me." She paused, her gaze steady. "It's not going to be easy. They don't know you. They don't understand who you are yet. But I'll allow it. I'll let you be a part of their lives, but only if you prove to me that you're serious. That you're not going to walk away again? He nodded earnestly. I won't, I swear I won't. They sat in silence for a while after that, both of them lost in thought. For the first time in years, he felt like there was a possibility of something more, something real, a future where he could be the father his children needed, where he could finally make amends for the mistakes of the past. When they finished their coffee, they stood up to leave. She handed him a small piece of paper with her phone number on it, a simple gesture but one that meant everything. It was the first step toward rebuilding something that had once been lost. He felt a glimmer of hope, something he hadn't felt in years. As he watched her walk out of the coffee shop, a sense of determination filled him. This was just the beginning, but it was a beginning he had been waiting for, even if he didn't know it. He was ready to do the work, to prove that he was more than just the man he had been. He was ready to be the father his children deserved. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in a long time. He woke up each morning with a renewed sense of determination. His life had always been about achievement, about building something from nothing, but now, his focus had shifted. It wasn't about business anymore. It wasn't about wealth or success. It was about being there for his children. Children he had never known existed until just days ago. Children he had failed, but now had a chance to try again. Every step he took in this new chapter felt heavy with meaning. He knew he couldn't erase the past, but he could shape the future. He had learned that the hard way. His business had consumed him. His ambition had blinded him, but now he was seeing clearly. He had a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. He reached out to her a few days after their coffee meeting, just to check in. She didn't hesitate to respond, though their conversations were always cautious, always careful. They hadn't picked up where they left off, but that was okay. This wasn't about picking up old pieces. This was about forging something new, something better. She agreed to meet him again, and this time they planned to include the kids. He was nervous, more nervous than he had ever been in his life. How do you start a relationship with children you don't know? How do you introduce yourself as someone who should have been there but wasn't? He spent hours thinking about how to make it right. But no matter how much he prepared, he knew the moment was still going to be difficult. When the day finally arrived, he met her at a small park on the outskirts of town. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the scene, and he could see her waiting by a bench. She looked at him, and for a second he caught a glimpse of the woman he had loved, the woman who had been there when he needed her. But now they were two strangers trying to rebuild something that had been lost. "Hey," he said, his voice a little unsteady. "How are they doing?" "They're good," she replied, her smile soft but wary. "They've been asking about you." "I think they're nervous," he nodded. He couldn't blame them. How could they not be? He was the man who had disappeared from their lives without a word, and now he was showing up, expecting to be welcomed with open arms. He didn't expect that, but he hoped for something. Anything. A few moments later, the twins appeared, walking towards them hand in hand. They were just as he remembered from the mall, their faces filled with curiosity and confusion. He felt his heart tighten as they approached. He had seen them once from a distance, but now, standing in front of him, they were even more real. They were his flesh and blood, and the weight of that truth hit him harder than anything he had ever felt. "Hi," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with sincerity. I'm your dad." The twins looked up at him, their faces unsure, their eyes flickering to their mother for reassurance. She gave them a small nod, encouraging them to greet him. The little boy, the older of the two by a few minutes, stepped forward first, his hand extended cautiously. "Hi," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The little girl followed suit, though she didn't reach out to shake his hand. Instead, she just looked at him, her gaze searching as though she was trying to figure out who he was. What he was to them, he couldn't blame her. He was a stranger to them, and in many ways they were strangers to him. He crouched down, bringing himself to their level, trying to make the moment feel less intimidating. "I'm really sorry I wasn't there before," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been, and I promise you I'm going to do my best to be here now." They didn't say anything at first, just watched him with wide eyes, unsure of what to make of this sudden change in their lives. He couldn't blame them for their hesitation. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It would take time, patience, and effort. And most of all, it would take consistency. He had to show them, day by day, that he was there for them, not just in words, but in actions. For the next hour, they sat in the park together. The twins played on the swings while he and their mother watched from a bench nearby, talking quietly. They didn't delve into the past, there was no need for that, not yet. Instead, they focused on the present, on the simple pleasure of being together. And in that moment, he realized something important. This wasn't just about him getting to know his children. It was about them getting to know him. He had to prove himself. To them, to her, and to himself. He couldn't just step back into their lives and expect things to magically fall into place. It would take time, but he was willing to do whatever it took, because for the first time in a long time, he had something that was truly worth fighting for. As the sun began to set, casting a beautiful soft light over the park, the twins started to run toward the swings again. The boy turned to him with a grin and asked, "Do you want to push us on the swings?" The question caught him off guard, and for a moment he just stared at him. It was so simple, so innocent, and yet it felt like the most significant thing in the world. This was his chance. His chance to be a father. "Yeah," he said, standing up and walking toward the swings. "I'd love to." For the next several minutes, he pushed the twins on the swings, their laughter filling the air. He couldn't help but smile as they giggled and shouted, "Higher, Daddy!" "Push us higher!" And as he pushed them, as he watched them soar through the air, he realized that this was it. This was what he had been missing. This was the part of life that had been missing all those years. Not the business, not the wealth, but the love, the connection, the joy of being present for the moments that truly mattered. When it was time to leave, the twins didn't want to go. They had grown attached to him in that short time, their curiosity now replaced with a budding sense of trust. He didn't expect them to love him immediately, but he could see the walls starting to come down just a little. It was enough for now. It was a start. As they all walked back to their cars, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to make the same mistake again. He was going to be there. For them, for her, for the family he had once lost. And with that promise, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take time, patience, and a lot of work. But for the first time in a long time, he had hope. He had a reason to keep going, a reason to be better, and he was going to do everything he could to make sure that this time he wouldn't walk away.